Welcome to Food on the Mind. This is your host, Jeb Stewart Johnston. I'd like to invite you to head on over to the website if you get a chance. It's at www.foodonthemind.com. Sign up for the newsletter. Grab your free mindful eating guide. You can even set up a consult call with me. Kind of talk about whatever it is you want to talk about. But mainly for me to help you get better at helping yourself. And now, without further ado, here's our next guest. Hello, welcome everyone. Today I have my good friend and, one of the first people I met in this industry, Dr. Mike T. Nelson. Most of you probably know him for his work primarily on metabolic flexibility, but Mike is one of the, I don't know if I would say the first people, but one of the early academics that kind of adopted us heathens in the regular fitness world and took us under his wing to help us all get a little bit smarter in the science of nutrition and fitness. But Mike is also, I think what's going to be really important for my focus in this podcast is that Mike is one of the guys that really started bringing to light more of the nutrition concepts as a whole in fitness. It was, people were focusing on exercise, which is super important, but within the exercise physiology world, a lot of people kind of were not paying a lot of attention to some of these nutrition concepts. And Mike is one of the first ones, I think, that in a time that nutrition was getting more and more dogmatic, saying that, like, hey, maybe it's more holistic than that through the metabolic flexibility. So I think what I'd like to start off with, Mike, is like we're going to delve more into kind of, again, with the whole food on the mind concept of how this ropes into other areas. But if we can just start, and I know that this is rehashed a lot, but there's probably people that haven't heard you speak before, that just the basic concepts of what metabolic flexibility is, and then we'll kind of dive more into all the other ideas of flexibility we can take in.
Yeah, perfect. You've been around fitness stuff long enough to see that these kind of arguments come and go. We had like the low fat craze, and now we've had like the high fat, low carb craze, and now I wasn't the only one to predict this, but protein is now bad because it's gonna shut off your autophagy, and we don't want to run mTOR too much, and God forsake we get too big or whatever, which doesn't really happen. But it seems like to write a book, you have to demonize a macronutrient group and say this is bad, don't ever do this. And again, this is in the realm of healthy people, not pathologies. And with metabolic flexibility, I'm like, okay, so let's just think about this. So if I do a super high-fat, ketogenic type diet, which we know can be done in a safe manner, but I'm a high-level athlete where speed and power matters a lot, it's not a good mix, right? Because speed and power is going to drop off. On the other hand, we could go to the other extremes too. So fitness is always about the extremes. So with metabolic flexibility, it's like, well, maybe we should consider the context of what it is you're doing and not necessarily demonize any macronutrient. So for a healthy individual, it's probably a good idea to use carbohydrates to a high degree. It's also probably a good idea to use fat to a high degree. Then it just depends upon what you're trying to do at that point. If you're going to, try to kill yourself doing 20 rep squats, I don't think I would do that on a super low-carb diet day in and day out and expect to, feel halfway decent with it. So carbohydrates are good for high-intensity exercise and performance. But when we're just sitting out, like having this chat, things of that nature, you probably want to be primarily using fat. There's no need to use a sort of higher energy fuel like carbohydrates. So metabolic flexibility is how well can you use carbohydrates on one end of the spectrum. How well can you shift to use fats on the other end of the spectrum? So you can use carbohydrates really well, you can use fats really well, and then how well can you switch back and forth between them, right? So the example I gave, high intensity speed and power, you definitely want to use carbs. You're just hanging out, watching Netflix, using fat is better for that.
Yeah, and from a totally personal anecdotal note, like I've gone through phases of like just like hammering carbs away, and
Mm-hmm.
I've never been like a high fat person, but you know, like I've gone really high carb, and it's been great. But I started just getting to this point of where I was like just constantly just feeling. I just felt terrible, and a lot of it was because I was trying to get so many calories that I wasn't getting any fiber in. So I kind of did this switch after coming back from Costa Rica, actually, where I was like, you know what, I don't feel great. How can I change this? So I just kind of switched just my day. I just kind of moved more of my carb timing around workouts,
Mm-hmm.
upped my fat content in the mornings because I was like, hey, you know, like I probably am not getting certain like micronutrients in because I'm not eating whole eggs. I'm like, you know,
Yeah.
and it was amazing. Like digestion improved. I think I'm making this up and it's totally anecdotal, but I feel like my nutrient partitioning improved because I was getting more out of more calories. I felt like, and I just felt better as a whole. So now I actually have a relatively high fat morning. My afternoon, which is around my workouts, is relatively high carb, low fat, and then evenings are kind of a solid blend. And of course, there's just a ton of protein and all around.
Yeah.
But totally anecdotally, I also feel much better, and to me, that is such an important aspect because if you don't feel good, like bottom line is your training's not going to be good.
No.
You're just not going to enjoy what you're doing.
Yeah. The amount of gonadal fortitude you need to get to the gym just becomes astronomical.
And that's honestly like I was training hard, and like if every one of us has had like a year of like we're training, it just kind of feels, and going into COVID, I was getting this point of like hating training, and then COVID hit, and it was like, oh my god, what did I just do? Like I just screwed myself. I hated training for the past year, and now I'm going to be so limited. But yeah, it's and I feel like so much of that is just. But I do think that sometimes, taking things to the extreme, I was going for massive hypertrophy. And so I thought that I just had to hammer carbs away. And it was like, you know what? Actually, when I felt into this more flexible model, I actually started seeing better results and better body composition as a result.
Yeah. And that kind of even begs the question, too, of which we don't know is how much of a caloric surplus do you need to, quote unquote, optimize or have better hypertrophy? It's like at some point your line is not going to be linear and it's going to, drop off, assuming you're not doing, boatloads of drugs or something like that. But even then, at some point, it's still going to drop off. It's just a different point. So is it a 500 calorie surplus, 1,000? If I were to throw a dart at a wall based on a handful of studies, probably 500. And again, that's even in practice harder to figure out exactly what that is because everything's always changing. So if you think back to, I have flashbacks to like the late 80s and early 90s about just how fat bodybuilders would get in the off season. And then you saw like how many of them had a hard time getting back, quote unquote, in shape again. So I think at some point, if you just way overshoot that, your body is going to give you feedback of like, no, this isn't so good. And I mean, I remember years ago, I was trying to get up to 250 was my goal for body weight. Because I'm like, that would put me at almost like 100 pounds over like when I started lifting. And I got to like 240, 245. I was stressed out of my mind doing my PhD. And from about 235 to 245, I realized, you know what? None of my lifts have gone up. I just got fatter, like really fast. So
Yeah.
I think I've kind of hit that top end for now.
Well, that's and I equate it to there's a lot of like fluid retention, a lot of intramuscular
Yes.
water, and like I just like there's just a lot of I just had a lot of bloating, and like when people would say they were bloated up until that point, I never understood what they meant. I was like I was like I think that's like a made up term, and then it was just like I just like constantly was just like everything just felt like garbage. I started. And and I wasn't that heavy. I mean, I'm only 5'8", so like I think I pushed 215 at one point.
Yeah.
And now I'm about 205, and honestly, I'm probably fatter than I need to be. Like I'd love to stay around 200 and lean out, but it's like one of those things too. Is each year I get a little bit older, I'm like, man, like the ideal of what I think is big is like looks really uncomfortable.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, I've cut down a lot, and I'm like, I had the realization about a year and a half ago. It was even at Ben's place in Costa Rica of like, I don't think I'm probably ever realistically going to go above 230 again. And hell, I may not even go above 220 again. It's just like for my frame and my goals and how much time I'd have to dedicate to it, and it's just probably not in the cards, and that's okay. It took me a while to actually kind of come to that that sort of realization.
Yeah.
I guess.
It's and I vacillate back and forth because like I go to the gym and there's a dude who's IFBB pro in there and I'm like, oh man, that guy's huge.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, oh yeah, this is his job.
Yeah.
Like that's what he does. Like that's all he does is eat and sleep and work out.
Yeah, and he's probably made other external supplement decisions that some of us may or may not want to do, and whatever, each to their own. I'm not passing any judgment or whatever, but you kind of everyone has to consider the big picture too of like, don't want to dedicate 5 hours of my day doing this. I love lifting, but not 5 hours a day to everything.
It's really the eating. I mean, honestly,
oh yeah,
it's like
that's the hardest
lifting.
Part.
The lifting is lifting's 90 minutes. It's great. Like when I was at my peak of like actually bulking and really putting on a lot of weight, like about a year ago, a lot more. My second time really of gaining weight. Pat Davidson and I were having a conversation and said. And I was like, I just feel like garbage. And he's like, me too, because he was kind of in the same boat. I was like, except for like 90 minutes a day when I feel like a god. Like in the gym, being heavier, like everything's awesome. But the other 23 hours, I just felt like garbage. And I was like, I don't know if the trade-off's worth it. My sleep apnea got really bad. Like it was just like, and that I wasn't even big. Like the guys that are my height, that are pro bodybuilders, are walking around at like 280.
Oh yeah,
like,
it's just.
I can't imagine how they feel from hour to hour.
Yeah, it's just so insane. And at some point, like I remember just having multiple when I was up at 4,500 calories a day, and you're trying to eat mostly whole food, right? I'm not like just inhaling Pop-Tarts every other meal. And like you're having this, half-hour staring contest with this massive bowl of rice, and you're just going, "What am I doing with my life?"
So one of the things that, again, I think the metabolic flexibility thing has been super helpful to a lot of people because it obviously the course is extremely complicated and the science is extremely complicated, but the concept as a whole is actually relatively simple when you break it down.
Yeah.
Like, hey, like we're just trying to make this easier, and you do it just by eating whole foods. And so one of the things that you've been kind of hinting at over the past couple of years is this idea of lately physiological flexibility, and I've also heard you even drop in psychological flexibility. So I think let's start because I really love, because again I think one of the things that we talk about a lot and I the people that I'm friends with in this industry that are all very interested in is this idea of like anti-fragility, of resilience. And to me, this really speaks to that as a whole. So can you kind of give me your little thing about physiological flexibility and kind of where you came up with this and how you started to develop that?
Yeah, so I mean, I kind of fell into metabolic flexibility starting, 13 years ago now. I started my PhD in exercise physiology. I transferred from the engineering department. And the guy who was in our department comes over and he goes, "Hey, we're looking at this topic on, metabolic flexibility and heart rate variability. They both involve a lot of math." And so my advisor at the time, points to me and he goes, "Hey, you, new math boy, these are your projects now." I don't want to do more math stuff. Shit, why did I come over here? And so they're trying to find a way to quantify metabolic flexibility using some advanced variability analysis, that kind of stuff. And so after I got kind of accustomed into thinking about that in terms of fuel systems in the body, a couple of years after that, I was like, well, how do we apply these concepts to like yourself as like a physiologic organism? And so I just kept looking in the research, and there wasn't really any terms per se of physiologic flexibility, but in different sub areas, you would find the topic kind of show up under different names. So I spent much time thinking about it, and I'm like, okay, so if we want to create a human that's more anti-fragile, more resilient, like once we have basic nutrition, good exercise, and sleep, our stress is somewhat manageable. Like, where do you go next? Like, what do you target? Like, what's your framework of figuring it out? So I thought, well, let's see, the body is organized probably by survival, right? Your body's going to do everything possible in order to survive. So what systems in the body does it have to hold constant or you die? And the first one is like, temperature. right? Humans are homeotherms. We have to kind of hang out at 98.6. It's actually a little bit different than that. But we also can experience high temperatures in sauna. We can experience cold temperatures, jumping in a cold lake in Minnesota. So we have this ability to kind of adapt within reasons to temperature. I was like, oh, interesting. And then I'm like, oh, what else do we have? Oh, pH, right? Your blood has to be very close to, it's around 7, pH. And any deviations from that, you're going to be in a world of hurt. However, you could hop on the concept 2 evil rower and do 500 meter or 2K and, get a ton of, quote, lactic acid, which is lactate and hydrogen ions. You could do some breathing techniques. You can do different things to increase an acid load or even a basic load. And your body will kind of buffer those things out. And we know that via adaptations, you get better at those buffering systems, especially on the hydrogen ion side. And you can look at blood glucose. You can also look at oxygen and CO2. So I'm like, okay, so if those are kind of the 4 homeostatic regulators, then maybe if we train those systems to have a wider range, then we'll be a more resilient organism, right? So if we look at a simple one related to nutrition like blood glucose, maybe you should be able to fast for 19 to 24 hours and not have your blood glucose like plummet to nothing and not be hypoglycemic and feel like you want to gnaw your arm off because you're so hungry. On the other hand, I have what I call the 2 Pop-Tart test. You probably should be able to eat 2 Pop-Tarts and not have your blood glucose spike over 120, maybe 140 in US units, right? Can you dispose of a high amount of glucose? And again, these don't mean that you're going to live at those extremes all the time. It's just like, can you buffer a high amount of stress, right? So think of like a massive like military vehicle that can buffer a lot of differences in terrain versus a 3-cylinder Yugo, right? You probably want to build in the capacity of your body to buffer these insults because I think you're going to be a more resilient organism over time.
Yeah, and I think that's so. It's so funny because yesterday now that I live in South Carolina, I actually drive again, so I actually can listen to podcasts. So I'm like, oh wow, it's like I threw on our friends James Serby, his podcast. He had our friend Ryan LeCure on. So the first 20 minutes of this podcast is them talking about the weather, and but it was kind of hilarious because James grew up in Charlotte, North Carolina, and he talked about playing soccer. If they would play like kids from the West Coast, they'd be like, oh, these kids can't handle this humidity and heat. We're going to crush them. Ryan's from Albany, and he's, talking about like how school would get canceled for snow, but he would have to ride his bike to wrestling practice anyways. But they were saying like, hey, like, there's this thing about growing up in a place where, there's this, and Ryan made a really great point of like, hey, there's this standard that everyone has to bear. Like everyone has to deal with the weather. Like, so you're kind of forced to be tough. Whereas, if you grow up somewhere where it's just beautiful all the time, not everyone has to ever deal with like, you don't ever get this like this stress adaptation or this result of like, hey, it's like life is going to suck for half the year. And I kind of love that. I was like, you know what? It's a really good point. Like growing up, it's like, hey, we all have to deal with the fact that it's hot, and if you want to play sports, you got to play outside. And it sucks, or you have to deal with the fact that it's really cold. And if you play, like, I remember football practice when temperatures would drop, and our coaches would come in the room and be like, half shirts today, no gloves. So the receivers weren't allowed to wear gloves, and then they would break out brand new footballs, and the quarterback would just hammer up, like just basically cause pain. But it was, it's like sport is about resilience, and I kind of love that. But like this idea of like actually being able to quantify it on the row, and like first of all, anyone who follows anyone who's a client of Mike's sees the like nasal breathing 2K row tests, so they know that he puts them through torture. But it's no one actually outwardly complains about it. They kind of complain about it, but the results seem to speak for themselves. So there's something happening there. Now, do you see this? Obviously, this creates more resilience from a standpoint of like, okay, now I can do hard things. How does this transfer over to the rest of their training?
Yeah. So what I came up with is, and initially when I did the whole physiologic certification or physiologic flexibility certification, I was not going to talk about this until the very end, but I soon realized when you get into the research of like say cold water immersion, pretty much all the stuff you've heard is BS. However, I think it's still useful, and there's some other, practical uses that are not talked about a lot. So my whole goal with the course, and even talking about the physiology side, is actually to get them to the psychological point, right? So if you think about our brain, right, the goal with, I would say, physiologic flexibility is to get your prefrontal cortex to override your limbic system, meaning take the new kind of more evolved part of your brain and have you use that to think your way out of stuff your little lizard brain doesn't want to do, right? So for example, getting into cold water, if it's cold enough, it always sucks when you first get in. Like, I've been doing it for a year and a half now. There hasn't been one day I've crawled into, 38 or 40 degree water and been like, yes, this feels warm. Woohoo! I made it. I'm adapted.
Yeah.
It's like, no, it still sucks. I know it's going to suck, and I can be prepared and have a better response to it sucking. It's like doing a max 2K on a rower. No matter how good you get, you can go to the elite level, it's just going to suck, right? There's just no way around it. So I think using that new part of your brain to go, aha, but I'm a smart brain. I can predict into the future to know that, yes, it's going to suck, but it's temporary, and I know that this has long-term benefits, so I'm going to still do it. And I think if you get really woo-woo on this, everyone in the future now, from Facebook to Google to selling you stuff to whatever, is going to target your lizard brain, right? Because it knows, oh, you want food delivered to your door? Great, we can have that happen. You can just press a button on your phone now. You don't have to reorder anything, and food shows up at your door, right? Because we're physiologically wired for efficiency, right? And our friend Dr. Ben House has talked a lot about this too. Like, I used to get mad at clients who would stop at the 7-Eleven and get like 4 Pop-Tarts and a large, Slurpee with no ice. I'm like, what the hell are you doing? This makes no sense at all. And then I realized, no, to your little lizard brain, that makes perfect sense, right? You can get like 550 calories for like $1.37 in literally less than a minute. That's like the ultimate of efficiency, right? So we're kind of hardwired for that. And I think the only way out of that whole mess is to train yourself via habit and setting up some stuff to do that's hard, to over time that gets a little bit easier and gets a little bit easier, and you get to make a decision that maybe is a little bit more hard but has long-term benefits. And then that then starts to become a habit, just like exercise. Right? You talk to someone who's never exercised, they're like, why do you want to do that? Like, I don't know, every time I exercise it hurts. It doesn't really hurt if you're doing it right, but they're not used to those sensations. Their brain literally thinks it's trying to hurt them, right? But over time, you go, okay, this is a little bit better. I know there's long-term benefits of it. And, you end up doing it for many years, and you can get yourself to do things that people who are new wouldn't be able to do. And I think that is the way we get out of a lot of the current mess we're in.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny you say, like, technically all advertising and marketing really is playing on at least an emotional level, if not a biological level. I mean, it's good advertising. Good advertising completely passes right past our logic, and it works on even when I know what they're doing.
Even when you know it, that's the scary part.
Yeah, I can be 100%, and I can say, man. I mean, and that's what people complain about Instagram targeted ads or whatever. I'm not ashamed to say it. I'll say it openly. I love it. I have found some stupid things that I might not need, but are kind of cool, that I've bought because they targeted me on Instagram, and they know, like, hey, this guy likes dumb things that are fun. Like, okay, cool. But I do think it's like so one of the interesting things that I see. So at first, because at first I started seeing you filling up your extra freezer with ice, and I was like, what's Mike doing? I was like, I know he's not doing this for recovery. Like, I know that, this, and so then when you started explaining, I was like, oh. And I think that's one of the pitfalls of fitness and nutrition and all this stuff, is that we fall into the trap of, there's only one reason that anyone might be doing something, and that reason is wrong.
Yeah.
So why would they do it? And it's like, there could be, it's like, when someone's doing a row a certain way and someone's like, well, that's not targeting lats. And it's like, well, what if they're trying to target mid-back? Or what if they're just training the row pattern? Like, what if they don't care? What if they're a wrestler and they're just
Yeah.
practicing picking someone up off the ground.
Yeah.
So it's and I fall into it. I mean, I think we all do because we have our biases but I think that's why things like this are so important to me, is to be like, okay, and being friends with people like you is important to me because I can see you doing something that goes against my bias, and then instead of me saying that's stupid, I have to say, well, I know it's not stupid.
I get a lot
There's
of
got to be a reason for it. Sure, and that's everyone's first response. Instead of saying like, "Hey, why are you doing this? Like, what is the purpose behind this?" It's, well, you know that doesn't work for recovery, and you're like, well, yeah, of course I know that.
Yeah.
I have a PhD in exercise physiology.
That was my first response years ago when I heard of Wim Hof doing stuff, and I'm like, what the hell? This is so stupid. That was like literally my first response. And then I remember looking into it, and I'm like, oh, maybe there's something to it. Oh, he actually does like science. Oh, wow, there's been a couple scientific reports. And I started reading the literature, and I remember like a couple of years after this, I was at a Swiss conference, and we're hanging out with, I won't say his name because it was a private conversation, but very well-known person in the fitness industry. Everybody would know. And we're just chatting, and I was asking him, I said, hey, we were talking about Wim Hof. I said, what do you think of Wim Hof? And he's like, I don't know, man. I think he's kind of kooky. And I'm like, yeah, that's a valid response, because it's definitely on the edge. But then you start looking at even though anecdotal reports, you're like, oh, well, maybe there is something here. Maybe there is something going on. And I think that's how a lot of stuff starts, right? A lot of stuff starts as that's on the edge. That's just a bunch of outliers. That's weird. It's kooky. And the next thing you know, like a couple of years, it's like mainstream and everybody's doing it.
Well, I think a perfect example of this is something you teach, RPR.
Yeah,
I mean,
that looks kooky as hell.
It's and so anyone who's not familiar, any of my clients are familiar with it because Mike and we talked one day and kind of came up with this protocol that I use for a lot of my clients to help them go to sleep, and it's just the basic RPR, reset that they can do in bed. And Mike, you were like, hey, I have some of my clients do this, and I don't know why, but I tell you what, and it's not everybody, but I would say probably at least half of my clients who I have do that are like, I don't know what that is, but I fell asleep last night. Like I just have to do some deep breathing, do that little reset, laying in bed, and they're like, and I was like, I don't care why it works. I don't care. Like if it helps you go to sleep, awesome. But it's one of those things. It's kooky, and it's like, okay, well, why is this working? Well, it's like, well, we don't know exactly. So, but the thing is. Even if it is placebo, whatever it is, if it works on 50%, I don't know many things that work on half of my clients. So if there's something that does, like that's a big deal.
Yeah, and initially I took a bunch of people and tested it on people who I said, hey, I'll have you come in. I want you to try this thing. You kind of push on yourself in weird areas and it helps with muscle activation. They're like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard of in my life. Perfect. Come on in. Right? Because I'm like, if it works in the face of a nocebo effect of someone who already thinks this is absolute bullshit, I'm like, it doesn't guarantee there's a physiologic response, but there's probably something there. And then after having, done it for 4.5 years, it still just boggles my mind that it works a vast majority of the time. And I've done a lot of other stuff in that area that, hasn't been nearly as effective. But again, it's like, well, why is that? Like, I can give you some theories as to why, but there's not a lot of published literature either. There's a couple poster presentations and that's it. So from a scientific standpoint, then the answer is we don't really know. It's not that it doesn't work or it does work. It's here's our observations. We don't have much to go on. So the answer is not really sure, but I don't see a downside either, and that was the first thing before I started teaching it was, oh God, I don't know if I want to teach people how to do their own hands-on stuff. That sounds like a disaster. But when I realized I'm playing around with it, I'm like, the biggest downside I ever found was sometimes it just didn't work, right? I never found anyone who actually made themselves worse. So I'm like, okay, so there's not much of a downside, but the upside is maybe unbounded and we're not really 100% sure what it is. Sounds like a good system to me then.
Well, and that's, I think that's the big thing. And it's for that base level, especially just kind of like some basic things to teach someone to do for themselves. If nothing else, I mean, having something that someone can do that it creates self-efficacy, that creates
Yes.
autonomy, that they're not reliant on me for is
100%.
I mean, that's a bonus right there. But again, it's like, when we talk about this, just the reset for sleep, most things that you would say to people, obviously it's going to be some kind of like, we were saying like take melatonin or even like breathing. If you tell someone to meditate, for a lot of people that I work with, they're not used to meditation or mindfulness. The idea of meditating can actually be a stressor. It can actually be like, I'm not doing this right, and it creates more problems. With this, they're just like, hey, like just you're not going to do anything wrong. You're not going to hurt yourself. It might hurt on your sternum for a minute, but that's about it.
Yeah.
And you're good. And I think that's something. And again, we have this vacillation in fitness and nutrition, especially where it's like we either have to go into things that are 100% backed by randomized controlled trials, or it's going to be crystals and anti-vaxxers. And like we can't find this middle ground of like, hey, like just because there's not a study on it, the study is just to kind of knock down the pins. Like if there's enough anecdotal evidence and there's not a downside, it's worth a shot.
Yeah, and I mean, if you live in that area like I do and you do and a bunch of other people we know, like you'll piss off a lot of people in the process, which is totally fine. Because it's like, oh, you don't have any science for that, or what are you doing? That's all woo-woo. I'm like, the client doesn't care. At the end of the day, the client's paying me $200 for a session. They want a result. They could give two hoots that there's 17 studies that prove or disprove it. I'm interested in that because I want to use the data and get them a better result, but at the end of the day, they just want to move better, feel better, and hit PRs in the gym. That's their goal. So, yeah. And the last part I like to too is about the self-efficacious thing, because I did some hands-on work in the past and got myself in a horrible place where I was the fixer of people in pain, and that was sort of became my mental outlook too, that I had to fix their pain, and that doesn't end well at all. That was a complete, utter disaster of my own doing. So when I saw this, I was very resistant. And when I realized that, you can do it on yourself, okay. So that gives self-efficacy back to that particular person then. So if somebody comes in and they did a session and then they say, I need to do another session, like my wife Jody will screen them and be like, well, how did your drills go? And if they're like, I didn't do any of them, like, okay, go away, go work on the drills, come back again later. Because I just refuse to work on someone again if they're not going to put in the time and effort to do something on their own, because I don't want to be that person that's quote unquote fixing them. It's like, I gave you the tools here. It's your job and responsibility to do it. If you did understand it or you don't have a question or something like that, that's different. We'll help you through that. Right. It's the same thing with mental stuff, psychology stuff, with nutrition, exercise. It's at the end, you want them to be somewhat self-autonomous, and they have to take the action to do that.
Well, I think as a practitioner, it becomes somewhat unethical to create a dependence model, because again, and unfortunately, we are in an industry that sometimes rewards guruism and rewards from just a personal satisfaction level of being the guy, or the girl, like the savior. And it's like all of a sudden, and we see it, like we watch these people get lifted up, and it's because and you're like, I don't know, this is healthy for either party. This is not a good really. A lot of my research in Buddhism, one of the first like kind of Buddhist groups that I got really interested in was Shambhala, because it's this like warrior kind of thing. And so I have a couple of older clients who have were in this world like back in the 70s when that whole thing. And the guy who kind of came over was this, he wrote these books. It was really influential and total guruism, but he was like a big drunk and like came to the U.S. and like was like part, and basically just it kind of turned into like his personal like sex cult. The guy was like none of these things that you're like reading about and you're thinking about of like higher state of, but like still was helping a lot of people, but also just it got like and actually even like this like the Bikram yoga guy, right? Like it's
that's what I was thinking too.
Yeah, so it kind of falls into that world of like, you get the high because you're the one that's like, playing God here. And so from a practitioner standpoint, it's like, hey, you got to be careful with this stuff because people's emotions, like there's a lot of trauma, all these things tied in. You got to be like, listen, this is not me fixing you. This is you fixing yourself. I'm just showing you a couple of tricks or some tools to help you.
Yeah, especially when you start getting into, trauma and stuff like that. It's like if you don't have your own shit figured out, like, in my opinion, you run the risk of really messing somebody else up.
Even
especially
if you
not
do,
knowing where your limits are.
Well, and, I work with a therapist, and I talk with my stuff with her, and she's not there to fix me.
Yeah.
She's there to say, like, oh, okay, like, hey, this is like, this is really good.
You thought about this or that?
Yeah, like she's not there to say, like, okay, well, here's what you're gonna do. This is gonna make it all better. It's like, hey, this is a chance for us to be objective, and that's someone who has 12 years of schooling in this stuff, not someone who went to a weekend certification.
Yeah.
So
as
we kind of
other...
like,
yeah. Oh, go ahead.
So as we kind of move into this like physiologic thing again, like I really love how now this physiologic is super intertwined with the psychology because you just spent some time with some special forces guys. My brother's a special forces guy, and so one of the conversations I remember having with him is like, how do you get through this training? Like, how do you get through special forces selection and ranger school? And he's like, I just realized, he's like, they spend too much money on me. They're not going to kill me, or they're going to try not to kill me.
Yeah, they have to feed me.
The worst case scenario, he's like, I'm not going to die. And I'm like, everyone thinks that the mentality of these guys is like, gung ho, I'm going to da-da-da-da. And it's like, no, the reality is like, I just have to not die.
Yeah.
He's like, I just got to not die. And so I'm like thinking, like, how does this translate to our, because it's you, we've worked with a lot of clients. You get that person in that's so gung ho, is like, I'm going to do this. And you hear it and you're like,
they make me nervous now. Initially, I was all excited.
Yeah.
Several years ago. I was like, yeah, they got it. This is great. And now I'm just like, uh-oh. Because what's going to happen. So I purposely just give them way less than what they want. And that's usually a bit of an argument. So I do the Krista Scott Dixon with them. I'm like, okay, well, show me then. Like, if you're going to crush these 3 things out of the 17 you want to do, then you sure as hell better crush these 3 things. And then maybe we'll give you 4.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because there's going to be a dip on the other side.
Well, and I think too is like from a psychological standpoint, I think we all want more. But like I look at a guy like one of your clients who's a friend of mine as well, Sam Pogue, who's kind of limited in his equipment, and you guys are basically he's basically doing like the same workout every day, right?
Yeah, he's doing a lot of aerobic base stuff we got from Cal Dietz. So cross-body, easy, low-rep stuff for 10 to 20 minutes just because he's limited on equipment. He's got kettlebells, a few other things, but he doesn't have a lot of cardiovascular stuff. The location he's living in now, it's not really that good to run in. So in terms of things we can do, get a little cross-body education, mostly concentric type work. And then, he's been crushing it. But a lot of people won't put up with the mentality of, I'm doing the same thing each day. I'm like, well, yeah, because you're still going to get some benefit from it. You're just accumulating volume over time. And at some point it will change. But a lot of people don't want to work through that 6, 8, 10, 12-week phase of 3 to 4 days for 10 to 20 minutes. May look very, very similar.
But and I think too, and again, I think that is part of that psychological flexibility of like, hey, how can I get to this point of, and also, we've been going through Groundhog Day for almost a year now. Most of us have had, and so learning to live in that world, we're starting to learn that might be just as important as learning to live in this, world of like constant sympathetic, just craziness. Like all of a sudden when that's taken away, all of us realized that, man, I was living in this weird place that is probably more damaging, but like I don't know how to live in the absence of that. And so having your stressor, your physiologic stressor be very similar, but then still be able to go in and put in that effort. And I'm watching his fitness just increase dramatically over time.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
I'm watching his Instagram and I'm just like, wow, like this is amazing. But like learning that could be such a benefit for so many of us, I think, because we can learn that we don't have to chase novelty for novelty's sake.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's finding also the threshold of when do you need to change, right? So from like December through January before I left for Costa Rica, I'm like, how many times can I front squat? Because like I realized, oh, my front squat is abysmal. It is like well below my bench press. My bench press is pretty shitty. So I'm like, okay, well, I can fix this, right? I have a gym. I know how to do this shit. So I'm like, what if I squat like 3 to 5 days per week? And so I came up with this hellish, front squat routine to do. And I was doing it 3 days a week for a while. And it was great. I added 40 pounds to my rep max on a front squat in probably 8 weeks. But towards the end of that, I knew I was going to be gone. So I knew I had time off. And the week before I left, it just went off the cliff. Like you have 300 milligrams of caffeine, you go to squat and everything hurts. And your performance is just abysmal. You're like, okay, so my peak was actually last week. And then you look back at your numbers, you're like, oh, wow, that actually worked really good. But now is definitely not the time to keep pushing it.
And I think that's where, keeping track of data I just had this conversation with a client not too long ago. And she's like, just question, like, when do our numbers change as far as like, macronutrients. And so, one thing that I always impart to people is like, I kind of work in this world where people have like kind of macros, and I do not place a whole lot of, for lack of a better term and better pun, weight on numbers, because most of the people I work with, they're not hitting numbers to any sort of accuracy that like it makes that big of a difference. If I can improve their behaviors around the food, we see change. So for her, we've been working together for quite a while. I think probably 9 months. She's lost like 70 pounds and we haven't changed her numbers. And I was like, we don't change your numbers until your numbers need changing. I mean, like you've adopted all the things that you need to do to lose weight. And most of the time, it's not something that needs to change for people that have a lot of weight to lose. And I was like, we don't want to chase novelty for novelty's sake. And part of the influence too is like, reading that, novelty is a really expensive cost for us. Like it requires a lot of brain power. It requires a lot of, quote unquote metabolism. It requires a lot to change something. So if we can avoid changing a variable, if we can avoid changing something that doesn't need to be changed, we can start to figure out more about where the deficits might be.
Yeah, and I've even had this discussion internally with myself, especially more clients in the past, because I still do some macro stuff now, but unless they're a competitor or something, I don't really track it super, super close for all the reasons you mentioned. But in the past, I got into this habit of someone would argue about, oh, when are my macros changing? And so I would just did not have the argument. I would just change them by like 10 grams. Like your carbs went up 10 grams, your protein went up 5, your fat went up 7. And it's just a mental change, right? And for some people, and this is like a short-term fix, I don't necessarily do this anymore, they were great, and all of a sudden their compliance and everything gets better. But at least then I knew enough to go, okay, so now I know what discussion we need to have next about this. Because it's like, even competitors who are like weighing and measuring everything, maybe you could see a 10-gram difference in carbohydrates, maybe, but even the people that are going to do that are like 0.05% of the population. So, yeah.
Well, and for me, the conversation that I have a lot with people is like, okay, what do you hope to gain through this change? Because if you can give me a good reason for that, I have no emotional attachment to any of this stuff. So I'm like, I'll give you whatever you want. Like if it's going to make a change.
I'm not emotionally invested in your macros.
No, not at all. People think that they am. It's like, and I think maybe like when I started doing this, I probably was, which is interesting because like, you get into this, you're like, no, I know that the science says that you should be losing weight at this and whatever. But for me, it's like, again, like to your point, like the numbers, the getting strict on the macro stuff with competitors. But like you said, even with my competitors, there's just too many other variables in there. Yeah. That them changing their numbers 10 grams of carbs, it makes a difference. If anything, they're like, I'm like, oh, we're just going to add 100 grams of carbs on your training days. It's like if we're going to make a difference, we're going to make a difference. But like to that thing of it's like, okay, so when I ask them like, what do you hope to gain for change? And if they come back to me and say like, I just feel like I might still go over, but I'll be closer and I'll feel better about that. I'm like, 100%. Let's go.
Yeah.
But if you think it's the numbers themselves that are going to change when we know that you're probably not hitting them, like how can we get better at the behaviors around it? And exercise. And again, that's what I really like about this conversation is that like this physiologic, this psychological, and this nutritional, pieces are all so intertwined.
Yeah, and I haven't had a client recently, and he's been doing great. He's been following the process, been putting in all the work, and one of his emails was, he's like, I don't know if I'm, really making any progress. And I'm like, in the past, I would have been more, I guess, emotionally upset about that. But now I'm like, okay, well, let's look at your data, right? So we had him redo some tests. It was 9 weeks at that point, so it was perfect timing. It was, coming up for time to be retested. Did his circumference, did his 2K, some rep max tests, and we looked at the data, and his waist stayed the same. Other body parts went up in size. His arms went up by like 3/4 of an inch. I think it was arms. His 2K time dropped by 1:10, so now he was at 7:35. So it wasn't like he was at 12 minutes and dropped to 11 minutes. That's a massive difference. Added 90 pounds to his 1RM on a trap bar deadlift. So all of his lifts went up. But I get it that the sensation, because it's so split out over 9 weeks, it definitely can feel like you're beating your you're beating your head against the wall, because it's so hard to see changes in yourself. And if your only metric is looking at yourself in the mirror each day and it's yourself, like I've gone through this myself too, it's really hard to see any difference because it is yourself and you're seeing that same thing all the time. So I think having other metrics to drive both directions to see, maybe if they didn't go up, which has definitely happened with clients I've had in the past, okay, we definitely need to make a difference. We need to go this direction now because that didn't work. But having some data to go both directions is super helpful.
Yeah, and that's why I love the things like I bought a rower.
Fun
for here because I just don't.
Nobody likes
partially because like no, but I kind of do because it doesn't feel like it's work. Like for me, it's always kind of work. Like even when I'm going slow, like if I'm doing like just kind of my zone 2 work where I'm at like I still feel I'm still pulling. Like it's still like And my wife gets mad because I can kind of coast because I'm 200 pounds and relatively strong. So for like me, when I'm like at 130 heartbeats per minute, I'm still like cranking pretty far. And she's but she's way better. She's a way better rower than I am. So she actually really likes it. I mainly bought it because I know she likes to row, and it's super portable. It's super easy to contain, but it is a machine that I hate it, but I like it because I feel like it's the one thing where I can bridge the gap between like, low and slow cardio stuff. And then a 500 sprint on that, like it doesn't matter how many times I do it. Like I want to puke after. Like it's rough. And then like the interval stuff is really great. So it's I need to spend more time on it now, but it'll become more and more into my staple in there.
Yeah, and I think it's because also pulling against a flywheel, if people have never done it, it's just different, right? Like so when I had more people training here in person. One thing, if people would come in and be like, I just want to get beat up, and you like try to talk them out of this, you're like, okay, fine. I got really good at just beating the crap out of people, but not mechanically damaging them so much that they couldn't walk. So it's like, you're going to go push the car back and forth. You're going to do some battling ropes, and you're going to do reverse sled drags and a few sledgehammer strikes. And you're going to keep doing that to basically fall down and puke. And it was enough concentric work, but it was also hard enough. Like if you're pushing a car, once you get that momentum going, like you just don't want to stop. There's this inherent build up to it. Like pulling on a flywheel is similar. Like if you try to pull slow, you just get your ass handed to you. So you have to have some type of power aspect into it just to overcome that resistance, and that's on every pull.
Yeah. And I think you're right. It's such a mechanical movement that it's kind of meditative in a way. It's like you just it's really easy to get a rhythm in, and like the computer thing's really nice because it kind of gives you like instant feedback. I wear my heart rate monitor and all that,
Mm-hmm.
and do all the stuff there. But it is like seeing that monitor and being like, okay, like I can watch it. I can watch my 500 time move up and down, or my 2000, whatever it is, like, and see my adjusted time and kind of stay in that range. Look at my heart rate, and I'm like, I like that. I like that kind of instant feedback and being like, okay, I can actually, because I'm not a like, I'm a I loved strongman because nothing went longer than a minute. Like,
Yeah.
I am out of the gate. I am 100%. Like, I like to just crush, and I just die at 45 seconds into any workout. So for me, having something that paces for me is really, really good.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I do. I got from Dr. Kenneth J at the Carrick Institute is we'll just do a bioenergetic profile on people, right? So we'll take them everywhere from 100 meters to 30 second, 60 second, 180 second wind gate. These are for like more high-end, like CrossFit type athletes.
Right.
2K, and then all the way out to like a 20-minute capacity test. And then there's good data from especially some Scandinavian countries, and you can map to see where they're at. So even for like a strength and power athlete, a lot of times I'll find like their 20-minute capacity is just absolute dog crap. Once we get that up to just a nominal level, like all of a sudden the recovery and everything else between sets, between workouts, everything goes back up. And then vice versa. You have some people who are really good at holding endurance and their speed and power is just horrible. And you get that up to a level that matches a little bit better, and then everything else improves again too.
So if we're like talking for someone at home who's just trying to kind of improve just kind of everything, like, right, like they're kind of working on their nutrition, they just want to be like a little bit better in the gym, but like I know because you use that rower as a really good metric for people, what how would you say, like, how would you have someone at home if they were like, okay, just kind of like test themselves and then retest and try to build that capacity?
Yeah, I mean, the easiest thing I do is, if you want super simple, is just get on a rower, adjust what's called the damper, right, or your drag factor to 120 to 130, right? So you can look up online how to do that. So that's at just a relatively fixed pace because you're probably using some random rower somewhere. And then set the distance for 2,000 meters and just row as hard as you can. It's going to suck big moose balls. And if you feel really bad, you can come back in 3 days and do it again. But take that data and then go into online, just type in Concept 2 VO2 max, and it'll take you to the Concept 2 site. And then you can put in that data and then put not highly trained rower, and it'll give you all the normative data, right? So what I'm kind of looking for people is, compared to population, where are they at? Are they really good, bad, average, excellent? And then the next step is you can go into the Concept 2 database where everyone has been logging all of their data. Go to the previous year because you'll have basically a whole year's worth of data. And you can see how you stack up for people of your gender, age, and weight. And so for most of those, again, I stole this from Dr. Kenneth J, is, I want to see most people at least at the 50% mark on there. And is that probably higher than population standards? Yeah, because you got a bunch of people who are rowing or logging stuff and are into fitness. But, I've had some people that are like at the bottom 5%. It's like, even if your goal is a physique athlete, I can absolutely 100% guarantee that this is limiting your progress. And you don't have to get up to 90%. You don't have to be an elite level rower. You can do the bike. You can do other modalities. But it also just gives people a marker to kind of look. And they're like, oh, wow, I didn't realize I sucked that bad, right? But it gives you something to then shoot for. Like, so when I first started doing it, I was horrible. I was like at the bottom, like 10%, 15%. Then I get up to 50%. So my long-term goal is to hit 75% of the population on the Concept 2 site for a 500 meter, 2K, and a 5K. So that's kind of my long-term goals. And I think, and Kenneth J has talked about this too, that 75th percentile is probably a pretty good marker. That's, for some people going to be a multi-year goal. But after that, it really starts flattening out. If you want to go from 75th percentile to 90 or 90 to 95th percentile, you're probably going to need a lot of specialization. That's probably going to be your main thing. It's going to take up a lot of time. But as an accessory thing, you can put in a fair amount of work, but you can probably get to a relatively high level without having to go like, 100% balls deep into being a rower on top of everything else.
Now, I know you. There's actually a really good conversation about what I'm going to ask you about in a minute that you did with Stronger Experts with Luke Lehman and Alex Viada, I believe.
Oh, yeah.
About nasal breathing. But where does the nasal breathing thing kind of come in here?
Yeah. So how I got into nasal breathing was probably almost, maybe over 4 years ago now. I had a bunch of, intermediate to kind of higher-ish, level regional competitors for CrossFit. And I just couldn't get them to stop beating the shit out of themselves. They were paying me a lot of money, too. So my first thought is, I'll just charge them a lot of money. And, that works to some degree. But so I came up with putting them on a rower. And because my first thought was, okay, easy. We'll just look at heart rate. But then something would happen to the heart rate monitor, the dog would eat it or got thrown under the couch, or, you would always be magically missing this heart rate data from it. So I said, okay, you're going to get on the rower, you're going to do a 5K, and you're only going to breathe through your nose the entire time. Because my first thought is that's automatically going to drop you from the top down. And I knew just from watching some of their videos and stuff, like when they're doing Metcons, their mouth is like open 100%. Like you ask them, like, you wake up in the morning and it feels like a bird died in your mouth. Yeah, how did you know? Mm-hmm. Sleeping with their mouth open all the time. And when I even started doing this, like, man, for me to get above like 110, it was hard without opening my mouth. So one guy in particular, we had him do the 5K. We said, give me your heart rate, give me your time, only breathe through your nose. His max heart rate was like 111. And I'm like, okay, that's perfect for what I want, because I want a lower intensity, longer duration thing. But for them, it felt hard, right? Because they're kind of addicted to doing things that feel hard. So for them, it fit the prescription of, I got their intensity down, but it felt hard, right? And so they're so trained to be like, okay, if this is hard, I got to keep doing it. So it fit those two criteria perfectly. And then over time, like in this guy's particular case, like 8 weeks later, he was hitting, 145. He could hit the 150s pretty good. But his capacity also went up dramatically during that time. So that's how I initially started doing it. And I started looking at some stuff like Brian McKenzie from Art of Breath has a lot of great stuff on it. And I'm like, oh, I think breathing at lower intensities through your nose is probably going to be better. And then if you fast forward many years, everything now is like, oh, everyone's just over breathing and you must breathe out of your nose 100% of the time. And I'm like, but during max exercise, what's going to limit most people is air exchange, unless you're just really deconditioned, right? So how much air are you going to get through two little small pipes versus one large pipe, right? At some point, that is going to be your rate limiter. And if you're breathing through your nose only, you just gave yourself a rate limiter, right? So I think you want to, again, just like metabolic flexibility, right? You want to expand the entire range. And Brian McKenzie's talked a lot about this. So lower level stuff, I think nasal in, nasal out is great. And then nasal in, mouth out. Just focus on an exhale. And then at some point, you're going to be breathing in and out of your mouth. However, I think that should be only really high-end performance, right? My pet peeve is that people get really into testing, which I love testing. I got a freaking Moxie. I got a freaking metabolic cart in my house, so I love
you bought
testing.
A metabolic cart. I love it.
Yeah, that was like my goal for 12 years. Like, oh, if I could ever get a metabolic cart, then my life is made. So I think it's great, but I lose track sometimes of testing, of how many people send me testing, and I'm like, oh, great, you got this Moxie data, you got this, and that heart rate. What was their performance? Like, you put them on a rower, right? You're going to get watts. Like, how did they do? Oh, I don't know, man. I forgot to check. I'm like, how could you forget to check? That's like, without knowing the output, the outcome of all of this, like, none of it matters. So I think sometimes people get too invested in, do I nasal breathe? Do I nasal breathe? Do I mouth? What do I do? Blah, 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 blah. It's like, if your mechanics and your output is going up and you're feeling better and you have a simple metric like maybe HRV to measure stress and it's not going crazy, whatever you did is working, right? Whatever you did, you're becoming more efficient. You're on the right track somewhere. So I think sometimes you have to dial it back a little bit. And I always do this thing where I'll use a whole bunch of technology and then I'll try not to use any technology, right? So I'll do, hands-on stuff, allowing myself to use technology, a megawave, HRV, whatever. And then literally I imagine myself, okay, you got dropped off on a desert island. You got to go train that guy. What do? You have nothing. You have no phone, no nothing. Can I transfer some of the knowledge and stuff I've learned from testing to just using your hands and just talking to someone? So I think both ends of the spectrum are good.
Well, I think that's what I appreciate about you so much is that, just this conversation of like, people look to you and they're like, oh, they know your background with HRV and like with all this testing and stuff. And I think that people assume that that's where you live, but so much of your coaching is much more esoteric. It's much more, hey, how is this affecting behavior? And again, I think most of our conversations actually fall in that realm of like,
yes,
okay, so that's cool that this stuff comes up, but how is the person applying it, or how do we get them to apply it? Like, how do we get them to do the thing? And I think that, like, again, whether it be RPR stuff or the heart rate variability, it's like if they're getting caught in the dogma and the tool without the application, like, it's like it doesn't matter. Like you said, if you don't have output data, like, it doesn't matter about this stuff. And so I think that the nasal breathing thing, it's hard for me, but it's like, I think when people started getting this argument about the nasal breathing stuff, it's like, for me, it was never like a weird thing, because coming from a fighting background, it's accepted as dogma. You start breathing through the mouth, you're going to get knocked out because your mouth's open, or you're going to get your jaw broken. So it's like, that's just a rule. Like, you better breathe. And when you get your nose broken, that's when stuff goes bad, because all of a sudden you have to start, because you can't breathe out of your nose. And so, like, for me, I was always like, yeah, it's probably a pretty good thing to be able to breathe out of your nose. And like you said, then taking away, to me, I love that the nasal breathing, you started doing it because it was a way to take away the tools, to take away the technology. Yep. It's like, hey, let's limit this. And again, you had that conversation with Viada. I remember him saying one time, people were like, how do I find zone 2? Like, if I'm, he's like, just when you're running, have a conversation.
Yeah, the old school talk.
Can you
test.
talk? Yeah, like it's like we don't need all this stuff. It's good to have it. But again, that's what I appreciate about you is like you're saying, like, and this even comes down. I think if we all applied this principle across our lives. I mean, I still remember we've had this a few times talking about, like, when you gave a talk at a seminar, and you talked about, like, one day I was going to do it with just the whiteboard. And then one day I was going to do it with just a computer. And I guess you showed up and they didn't have a whiteboard or something. But it's like, hey, how, like even in talks, like, can I convey my message without my PowerPoint? Because if not, maybe my message isn't that great.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny because the first time I did that for a larger audience was actually at Ben House's place before he had the new place at the first time we were down there. And it was getting closer to talks. He's like, hey, you got time to do, a second talk on supplements? I'm like, perfect. And in my head, I'm thinking, God, I don't know the audience. I haven't been there yet. Like, I did one talk from in Austin. I'm like, screw it. I'll just ask them, what do they want to know? I've got an hour and a half. And so I go up there, and I'm like, all right, guys, supplements. What do you want to know? And so I just start writing stuff down on the right side of the board. And my wife in the back is like looking horrified, and Ben's kind of looking very quizzical, and I, ended up doing it, and I tied all the parts together, and it turned out okay. And in my head, I did it initially because it was a way to save time, and I could, modify stuff on the fly without having 800 slides. And it turns out like everyone was like, thought that was like the greatest talk ever. Like, oh, it was so cool that you did all that. And I'm thinking, I'm like, shit, why am I spending like hours upon hours doing a formal PowerPoint that people are probably less interested in than something else? So like the one you were at, I was like, okay, could this be a teaching point where I'm going to now give you a talk that is literally only by PowerPoint and nothing else to constrain it to that? Because if you're doing academic talks and that kind of stuff, that's all you get. If you're on national stage at NSCA, the friggin' screen's like 800 feet wide. You can't do a whiteboard for that many people. And then on the flip side, the next day, can you do a talk that is only a whiteboard? There's no pictures, no nothing else. And, again, I think like you said, can you get good at doing both of those skill sets? And over time, you can kind of decide which one you like better, and then, kind of pick talks that kind of go in that direction. But, both of them are useful. Again, it's defined by the constraints of the system that you have to play in. If you think you're going to go to ACSM and give a talk on a whiteboard, good friggin' luck. But if you think you're going to give a talk to a local gym and bamboozle them with 800 slides on PowerPoint and expect anyone to pick anything up, they're going to throw dumbbells at your head.
Yeah, but I think it more speaks to your just overall philosophy. It's like, again, and I think this comes back to and it's I sometimes worry about getting pigeonholed because I love the term of anti-fragile and resilient, but I think there's some clown shoes out there, people
Oh
that
God,
use it,
yeah.
and that drives me crazy. But like, I really feel like that mentality of like, let me broaden my horizons, let me not get constrained by these outside things, whether it's in fitness, whether it's in nutrition, whether it's in presenting, whether it's in business, whether it's in coaching, like just constantly challenging ourselves to step outside of our comfort zone. It really does just make us better across the board. And I don't know, it's
Yeah. And I think that's where all the, I mean, at some point, right? And we can say this because we're older people now, I guess. Not that I feel like I'm old, but, like, you've been just it for like, 2 decades. I guess you're kind of the older people in fitness. But at some point, like, there's only so much you can go down without becoming very, very niched in a certain area. And to me, the interesting parts have always been like, what are the overlaps? What's the overlap between engineering
mm-hmm.
and physiology? And so like about probably 8 years ago, I set up like for myself just an internal standard of, okay, what level do I need to get to before I can start crossing areas? Because there's a double-sided coin where a lot of people will cross areas too soon and they know nothing about either area. And Tom Myers said once, he's like, if you just throw a bunch of shit into a pot, you're gonna get shit stew. And no one wants that. But he's like, if you go to a chef who knows what to combine for ingredients, they can combine very esoteric stuff and it can be really, really good. But he's like, they're also at an extremely high level and kind of know what to combine. I was like, oh, cool. So I was like, okay, for myself, can I get to the level where I'm good enough at one thing that the market will pay me only for that one thing, right? Can I get good enough at
Mm-hmm.
hands-on therapy that literally people pay me $200 a session and they know nothing about me anywhere else? Can I then teach for an organization that does that, right? So now I'm teaching other people to do that. So for me, can I get paid for that particular thing? And can I teach that particular thing, either on my own or for an organization? For myself, at that point, now I can combine that with something else. Right? It's like the talks we had. Like, how do you combine maybe nutrition with a little bit of psychology with some hands-on stuff? Oh, okay, breathing. Do some breathing stuff first. They can better relax at night.
Yeah, and I think that's such an interesting way to put it. Like, um, hey, here's what I want to get really good at. I'm also going to get really good at this thing, and thinking about them as standalone, I think is where a lot of people probably miss out. Because if you can be, and it doesn't mean you have to be the expert, but if you can be enough that someone is willing to pay you for that thing, then probably gotten pretty good at it, right? And you can probably if you can teach it, you've probably gotten really good at it, and then you can start to combine those things together. I love that. That's awesome. And I think that speaks to kind of this whole idea of these of again, your kind of what you do, whether it be the metabolic flexibility or the physiologic flexibility or the psychological flexibility. These things are all speak to that mindset, which I think is actually probably too too little examined in our field. I think so many people want to focus on one thing, and that not and they aren't flexible. Whether that be in their training modality, whether that be in, they took a PRI course and so now anything with an extension is going to die immediately, or they, whatever it might be, people are very inflexible because it's a lot easier to sell inflexible. It's probably a lot easier to make money in that. Mm-hmm. Yep. And that's, I mean, it's, and again, and that's really what this podcast is about. This is what it's trying to like again, like I had Lisa Lewis on, behavioral psychologist, who also really into. She's really into training, and she helps fitness professionals and works. I had Tommy on, who obviously just does everything, and so it's like, but all the people that I'm really interested in working with and being around and networking with and learning from all adopt that kind of idea, because there's going to be some time I'm going to go down the rabbit hole and find that one person who really, but like. I'm going to go like take a course from them, but I don't know that I want to sit and hang out until 2 a.m. at a conference talking to them about stuff, because, like I'm probably going to end up talking, like, if it's 2 a.m. in Kansas City, we're going to be talking about Corrosion of Conformity album, probably not about nutrition. Like that's the people that interest me, is like, I like all the other stuff. Like you said, there's got to be more to it than that. So, but anyways, I just, I want to thank you for coming on here again. You're someone who I just not only someone I just really like, but I really appreciate you, and I appreciate your stance in the industry, and just being you and doing all this stuff. It's, it again, like people bitch about this industry, but I find I've met just the greatest people and have the best time talking with you guys. So thank you so much. And guys, where can I don't know if your Metflex cert is open now. I can't keep track of your things, but what do you have going on right now, and where can people find you, and where can people find out more about these courses and your coaching? The email is the best though, like, because yeah, definitely. Like, if anyone's listening, sign up for the newsletter. It's there's always like really, really, really good research based content, and your writing is really good. Like, a lot of people assume scientist like equals bad writing, but there's good. It's actually enjoyable, fun content to read. So it's informative and entertaining. So again, thank you so much, Mike. Thank you guys for listening, and if you like this, make sure you hit subscribe and join in. All right, thanks a lot.